about the person who's standing in front of me. Do they know anything about what they're talking about? Is it all theoretical? Is it something that they think might work? So I'll just give you a little bit, very quickly, my background, and then I'm going to jump right into how I've used some of these equipment that you see in front of you, and how I incorporate it in my classroom in order to make this whole connection with my students. Who am I? I am a teacher, right? So I want you to know that. So I'm in the classroom as we speak. I have my students who I was just trying to connect to, who's walking around the classroom trying to find a good signal somewhere, and I just disconnected him and I said I'm going to go on without him. So I really enjoy what I'm doing here, and I can't imagine doing anything else, which I think is a really good testament to the profession. And what am I doing here? I'm hoping that at the end of this, you might not necessarily do exactly what I'm doing, but I might give you ideas of what you could do. And that's what I think is really one of the intents when you come into these conferences and you come into our workshops, that you're not necessarily imitating the whatever that person's doing in front of you, but you have something that you're thinking about, you don't know was possible, and maybe it's a genesis of an idea, you didn't even realize it was a possibility, and then you just start thinking, and you get a storm of ideas. So I started at Central Tech, big high school in Toronto. Walked out of Teachers College in '96. There's no jobs like there are now, and my prospects weren't very good, but I went down to the States, did some camp thing, came back, and I walked in my first day. I was a little bit older than the students, and somehow they hired me. I didn't teach science in my first year. I taught business English and computers. Back then I actually taught internet. Can you believe that? Internet. Teaching a course on internet. How to surf, but it was like Netscape, and that's not going that language. I actually resigned from the Toronto Board in 2001 when it amalgamated, and I came out to Peel, so in this area. And the first school I went to was Turner Fenton. It's actually two schools that was combined into one, and Turner Fenton is one of those schools that has everything. It's not like Central, because Central was a huge, massive 3,000 body school. This one here was a little bit smaller, but they did have some special basic all the way up to IB. Funny story about Turner Fenton, I saw them on that, remember that article was printed about the high schools on certain lists that their marks are inflated? Yeah, they're one of them. Then I left Turner, I went to Fletcher's Meadow, which is up the road, a brand new school. Peel was opening up a new school every single year, so that was really cool. And they opened up this one school, and then they opened up Sandalwood, and then suddenly opened up this one. I applied, and I was very fortunate to be hired as the head at this new school, and our focus was interdisciplinary as the big theme. When schools open up, they always have a theme, right, of some sort. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so I was really keen about doing amazing things at the school, but then a really interesting opportunity opened up at the board. When I left the school, went to the board. At that point, there was two of us, one for the south schools, south of the 401, one for the north schools, north of the 401. So I had about 20 high schools or something like that I was responsible for. And at that point, there was no such thing really as blended learning, right? D2L didn't really exist at that point. Angel is what we're using, and there's some other things. And we're using it for a lot of continuing education at nighttime or in summer school. And some of us were using it in the classroom. So our goal was to help teachers discover what this was and maybe start blending and integrating their material from the classroom online. And now it's a much different story. We're all familiar with those kind of environments. But back then, no one was. So imagine sitting on a phone in, not the board office, but in some, because they forgot about us, or in some adult ed center on a phone, calling people saying, hey, my name is Clayton Ellis, and I'm the Bell. They're like, what? The blended e-learning resource teacher. The what? What is that? So that was tough in the beginning, but amazing as it progressed over 3 years. I left that position, went back to another high school, Heart Lake, and I did a 1 year stint with the cross-curricular, I was still teaching science, but I was doing a cross-curricular headship, integrating technology, 21st century learning, that kind of stuff in the classroom. And then another school opened up, and I thought, this David Suzuki is all about the environment. I mean, that was going to be the theme. It was kind of like a dream school if you're a science teacher, and potentially be one of the leaders in the school. So I applied, and somehow I ended up with the position, and 8 years later, here I am. So David Suzuki is a fantastic school. We're doing some really cool things in the building, and if it relates to the environment or green or sustainability or whatnot, every single teacher is on board. So in this school, when we did the interdisciplinary focus on environmental theme, it worked. In the previous school, people have their little silos and everyone's more important than the other one in some respects. But here we all agreed the environment was super important, and that was our focus. So it really worked out nicely. We have some really nice attributions to the school based on the environment. Also, some other things I've been involved with. I've been fortunate to be involved with some ministry work in VROC and Pasco and some other places where I've had a chance to basically hone my trade. I'm a teacher. But being able to be in collaborating with some of these organizations really allows you to play with some really cool tools and engage the students, and all of us end up being in a much better position because of it. So that was something that was good for me. So let's back up. So I started in 1996. The goal of this workshop is to talk about how we can take the students and use Probeware, but also use other technologies in order to allow the students to be engaged in the learning process, right? So we're going to use the 21st century teaching and learning model with the 6 C's. I'll come back to that in a moment. But I can tell you when I first started in 1996 and I walked into Central Tech, there was a room, a computer lab with about 50 computers in the basement. And kids came from 6th floor, 5th floor, 4th floor, wherever in the building, the other 2 buildings, and they came to this room, the grade 9 room, and they sat down, and initially they were just I don't even know what they were doing, because there weren't really games back then. But if you wanted to use a computer, you had to go to the basement where the computers were kept. You couldn't go anywhere else. And in terms of network and bandwidth, it was the infancy, so there wasn't really good connections, but you're only getting text things anyway. Now we're 2018, and it's pervasive. The students have technology in their hand. I know there's a lot of people and teachers and students complaining about the fact that their technology they have in their hand is not really a teaching tool or a learning tool, depending on how to use it, but it could be. And suddenly this handicap that we might have where we don't have access to technology, it's gone. I mean, we can really leverage this, and a lot of the companies are using the mobile tech in order to allow us to do some really good data collection. So when I talk about the 21st century teaching and learning, I'm talking about the 6 C's. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, because I know different people come up with different ideas of technology, but I really like the framework of the 6 C's. A lot of people think 21st century technology, they think, or teaching and learning, and they think technology, but really it's a way of thinking. And you have to reculture the classroom, reculture the students, reculture the teachers, the parents, everybody to understand how to best use the technology. The technology is a tool to allow students to learn in this new environment. So, some of the strategies, and when I talk about 21st century teaching and learning, I'm talking about critical thinking. That's key. Wealth of information. Students can't just look at it and assume that it's real, especially right now with the political climate that we have. We're talking about collaboration and communication. How do students talk from one to the next? I would like to say that we're in an age where you can connect to anyone very easily. I might use my phone to connect to a person as opposed to using the data in the building in a hotel, because I think there's too many people on it to stream. But communication and collaboration are key because we're not in an isolated environment anymore. We were just connecting this morning to people in Kamchatka, in Northwest Territories, Yukon, BC, students in our school are doing this town hall debate all over the country, and it's really cool because they did it from right within the classroom, and it was a very good experience. Collaboration, I mentioned, citizenship, character, and creativity. All these things are elements of the 21st century teaching and learning model. All right, so here are a bunch of tools that I use. If I were to snapshot, that's what I did. I snapshot 1 week. I took out my lesson plan for 1 week, and I snapshot all the things I was using in that 1 week. And I'd say this is pretty typical of what's happening in many schools in terms of the technology that's being embedded. So I'm going to talk about a few of these things right now. When we talk about the classroom, so the classroom, you think of this big rectangle. It's a white box, and walls are around, and the learning happens in the class, and the experts at the front of the class, and you listen to them, we talk back and forth, and they leave. We're trying to break that model, and we're looking at going outside that box. I know it's an old cliche, but it's still very appropriate in that we want the students to forget those walls around them. And even though we're doing data collection inside the classroom, we want to be able to collect data outside, collect data from other partners, share that data, collaborate, get experts to look at the data, get experts to look at my feedback, maybe propose something to them, see if they agree with me, and so on and so on and so on. Those are the kind of things that we can do in this day and age. As a quick aside, just before I jump into the probes here, I was thinking back to 1996 when I was doing diversity of life and teaching biology with content. But diversity of life is one of those units that could be amazing because kids love animals in elementary school. They love watching the lion do its thing, the cheetah do its thing, and the giraffe doing its thing. But it's a lot of content. And so a lot of times when we talk to certain students and even teachers who are teaching this, they're not really that keen on teaching the concept. But it could be so exciting. If we just fast forward and think about the reculturing using this kind of 21st teaching and learning model. So what we just did is we I brought in a bunch of animals. We actually have animals in our department, and once we connect with Pratik, he might show you some of them. And we had the animals in this kind of, we call it a mystery black box. We covered up all the animals. We had some mounted animals. We had some real animals, snakes and lizards. We were doing an arthropod thing, so there were a vinegar room that looks like a scorpion, and a couple of tarantulas, and crickets, and a lot of larvae, and hornworms, and stuff like that, and all covered. And so the students were then given a Google Doc, right? We use Google Docs all the time. Fantastic collaboration, 21st century teaching and learning tool. And so on the Google Doc, they were given a whole bunch of points. They had to look at the kingdom, the phylum, obscure fact, and they got 10 minutes to research. So they're all independently researching. Some of them are collaborating because they prefer to do that. That's fine. Talking, working. At the end of 10 minutes, they then have to give a clue every 30 seconds. And everyone has access to the doc. So as they look at the doc, they're giving these clues every 30 seconds, and then they're trying to use their understanding of what the characteristics are, exoskeleton that's hard, and antenna maybe, and body segments, and jointed appendages, and they're coming up with all this on their own, as opposed to the experts, supposedly me, talking about what the characteristics are. They're seeing it in all these 25 different arthropods. And then, based on that, they come to some commonality. Eventually, I have a lesson, and I do bring the things back together. We use some interactive concept mapping tools. My Dome was the one that's kind of connected with our board, but there's inspiration and smart ideas as well. And then there's a classic note, but it's really for them to use as review, and I look at the important points. We talk about the actual learning they do need to know, but a lot of it they actually came back up with, so the classic PowerPoint. And then at the end of it, there's the evaluation tool. The evaluation tool of them designing an arthropod. After this whole thing's said and done, they're going to go out and design an arthropod. And to make it more 2018, you get them to get some expertise. So what we do with a lot of our students with these big tasks is we ask them to find an expert. There's so many in Ontario, there's so many in Canada, they're pretty easy. Many of them have grad students, they're happy to talk to you. And so they have to do a bit of research, find an expert, and actually pose some of their ideas to those experts. And I'd say about 70% of our students get responses from the experts when they pose it. It's part of the evaluation. So something like that is just shifting the culture, shifting the learning, and at the end of it, the learning the students have and the memories of what they did when they graduate, they talk about some of the activities they did. When they make those connections outside the classroom, those are real moments of learning. And that's just the product of one of the students. Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to connect to a student. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to. So just give me one moment, because the Wi-Fi here was terrible. So I'm going to try one more time. See, there's just a few less people in here. So I'm texting him now. Pratik, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm going to stop my video though, okay? And, okay, Pratik, so right now they can see your desktop. It's a little jumpy, but at least we're somewhat connected. And Pratik, what I'd like you to do is, I'm just going to give a context and I'll let you know what I'd like you to do, okay, Pratik? So the context is, here I am, I'm sitting in my classroom with my students, and I am noticing the leaves are changing color. Some of the leaves are green, and now a month later they're reds and oranges and yellows. And when I talk to some of my colleagues around the country or somewhere else in the world, they're just completely green. And I'd like to know, is there something about those leaves, as opposed to just talking about photosynthesis in grade 12 and metabolism and I want to know there's something about the climate, something about the weather, something about the soil, something that is causing the leaves to have different coloration. We know that the temperature causes the chlorophyll to break down, but let's explore a bit more. So what I asked Pratik here to do is to take some leaves this morning and go through a process. Pratik, can you hear me still?
Yes, I can.
Can you explain what you did this morning?
Sorry.
Can you explain what you did this morning? I don't have speakers, so if we can hear.
We're doing this to figure out the absorption rate of the leaves and what pigments they absorb and what light they reflect. and see like what the ideal light for a plant to grow under.
Are you able to show them in the colorimeter how you would measure the material?
Okay, so I'm gonna start like. So first, I got myself some red leaves that I found near my house. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's right here. And then after that, I used my scissors and I cut them into little pieces. And after I cut them into pieces, I brought ethanol along, and I soaked them for a couple hours in ethanol. And you know, well, you can see that the red leaves have lost all their pigment, and the ethanol which is usually clear is a little bit red or yellow, depending on what you see. And along with that, Mr. Ellis also did green leaves overnight, and you can see the green one is more dense. You can see it's like green. And basically, after that, you get one of these cuvettes right here that I've set up, and you basically use it with a colorimeter. So the cuvette, okay. You take, I'm gonna take the green liquid and I pour it on the cuvette. So the cuvette is what goes in the colorimeter. You don't want it too much as it can still recap it. And we'll do the same thing with the red one. So you just want the liquid, you don't want the leaves. And also, we're gonna calibrate the colorimeter first. So I have a separate cuvette already filled with ethanol, and I say do it. So now I'm gonna set the colorimeter. So first, when you turn it on, there's a button in the back, and you see the light starts going. And then I have to set. I have my Bluetooth already on my phone, and I'm gonna start sharing my screen. And I'm gonna go to my app, my store. And you guys should see it. I'm gonna click on the Bluetooth app at the top right, and I'm gonna find the colorimeter. You can see the colorimeter 55881 colorimeter, and I connect it. And as it connects, it actually calibrated, and I'm gonna calibrate it. So I'm gonna put that colorimeter. I don't know, you guys can't see the project, no?
So right now he's taking a tool like this and he's putting a cuvette
So the green check mark there, so it's calibrated.
into it like this.
And so I'm gonna do a new experiment. I'm gonna start the experiment top left. And then on experiment, click start labs, absorption transmission. And now we're basically ready. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen again and the camera. And you can see, so it's ready. The camera is set up, it's all ready now. And now, so I'll take the green cuvette, I'm gonna put it in there, and it should work. And let me switch my thing again. And I'm gonna press start. And you should see, you can see some, as the time goes on, you can see the colors. And that's it. And we change it. So I'm going to change it with the red one. We do the red one. And you can see it's different now. The red one absorbs purple, green, and orange. Yeah, it was purple, red, green, and orange than the other one. And that's basically it for the colorimeter. That's how it works. and that should be, it shows what it is, and that's what it is. After that, spread off, and we should be good.
Okay, Pratik, that was perfect. Can you just show them the weather sensor that you have there? So
here's the weather sensor.
Yeah,
it's
but
a new one that was done today, that we did this year.
now you don't need to talk about it. So just hold it for a second. So what he did there is, if I was doing this in a classroom, as opposed to just collecting data, because what we do is, for some people, you're collecting data with thermometers and the old spec. I don't know if you guys have the old spec 20, and you're getting it data, you're running it down. It's taking a while to collect it. But now I'm using the probeware to collect the data, and it's instant. And what he did is, we can then analyze those wavelengths to determine what's going on, what's being absorbed. But if I'm taking it to the next level, what I'd want is, I'd want to connect that information with somebody else and get my students to talk to another person in another location. What I'm showing is how easy it is using, we're not paying for this technology. Like Zoom is free. It's a free piece of software, and it allows you to share your desktop. It allows you to share the data instantly. I can take the actual numbers and export it and mail it or text it or whatever I'd like, and get someone else to analyze it. And so now, pretend he's in Brampton, so he's like 12 kilometers away from us right now. But pretend that he's a little bit further away, and he's got this weather sensor. So Pratik, while I'm talking, can you just connect it and then head outside to the terrace? So he might go outside, and he can then measure the weather and tell us about the humidity. And so now I'm going to collect and talk to people in Texas. I'm going to talk to people in Northwest Territories. I'm going to talk to people in other parts of Ontario, and they're going to share their leaves, their pigments, their temperature data, and then I'll be able to use this, or my students will be able to use this data and to analyze it. Is there any relationship? I don't know. But it gives you another opportunity for inquiry, and that's what we're really trying to focus on in science here, is get our students to ask questions, good questions, and these tools here allow them to do that. And the nice thing is that you can ask them questions that you don't know the answer to, and getting the data, it's pretty straightforward. So a little bit later during this workshop, I'm going to show you how you get to those experts, because some people think getting to the experts is more difficult than it actually is. Pratik, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
You're frozen up, so I don't know if you're sharing anything, but it's okay though, Pratik. I want to thank you for coming in. I'm going to thank you for coming in, and I'm going to disconnect from you now.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Pratik.
Yeah, you too.
All right, so another lab. Here's a lab that I like to do with grade 10. I'm trying to focus on labs that you would do with pretty much anyone, as opposed to the specialized science, biochemistry, or physics. So I like this lab a lot because there's so many good connections with this one. It's an albedo lab, so I use this in climate change. You could talk about albedo in grade 9 with ecology. You can talk about albedo in physics. You can talk about albedo in biology. So it's a pretty good general lab. So I'm going to demonstrate how this lab would work. Once upon a time, if I was going to do an albedo lab, it would be very difficult to do. What I would do is I would drop a bunch of dirt, sand, gravel, white sand, something on top of a surface. And then I'd shine a heat lamp on top of it, and then I would test the temperature change with a thermometer. So that's what I do once upon a time. And I can tell you from experience what the students would do, because really they were supposed to be designing this experiment. I had to tell them a lot, because if they buried the entire thermometer, they couldn't read it. And so they'd end up moving it, but then it'd give them the wrong temperature. And they were supposed to be measuring the change over a period of time so they can create a graph. But a lot of them would look at the beginning and they'd look at the end, and then all the data in between was gone, was mysteriously disappeared. They didn't measure it. So there were a lot of problems with the experiment if you wanted to go open. If I was more prescriptive, then we got good information, but then it kind of, I didn't realize the same inquiry that I wanted to. So now we fast forward a bit to 2018 and what I might do here. And I have the lab partially set up, but I want to show you how easy it is to run a lab like this in the classroom. So currently what I have, instead of the classic alcohol thermometer, I have these temperature probes. And with these temperature probes, what they do is they measure exactly what it says. It measures the temperature. I have older probes here, and if you talk to Pasco, you'll notice that they have newer probes that are wireless that can connect very nicely to your computers with Bluetooth or your devices. Because we got these 7 years ago, they didn't have that facility, but fortunately, they came up with this little adapter that allows us to connect any of our old probes so that we can connect wirelessly to our computers and our devices. So I have some of those connected. So I'm going to run this experiment, and I'm going to try to figure out this whole albedo thing. How does it work? In grade 10, we're talking about climate. We're also talking about a few other things as well. And we're talking about how the Earth is reflecting less or reflecting more light, and because of that, it's heating up or cooling down, right? That's the question they're asking. And so as we get them to explore albedo, we have a whole bunch of different substrates, many different colors. We also look at something like specific heat capacity. So for black soil, we actually have moist soil and we have dry soil. And they make up these hypotheses. And a lot of them don't take account for the water and what it does, even though we kind of alluded to it. So I don't have anything wet or dry, everything's just dry. I'm going to put some black earth on one. I'm going to put some gravel. And the question is it fair for me to test the temperature difference of dirt versus gravel? And that's the kind of question we asked them, because at this point, we would have taught something about specific heat capacity and talking about how different substances, regardless of their color, are going to absorb heat differently. So what I've done is I covered my temperature probes with this material, and I have this heat lamp. So I'm going to go to the software. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the software. So here's the software. He did the same thing. He was on his phone, and I'm on my computer. And the great thing about this application is it looks the same both ways. So you don't have to learn or relearn or give them slightly altered instruction, because that's very painful to teach with 31 kids in your class, giving them different instructions. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set this up. I'm going to turn my sensors on. One is already connected, just so I can show you connected. Now this one I just turned on. Notice what happened when I turned them on? I can see these little icons that allow me to select them and add them to my graph here. And here's my third one. So I don't really want to I'm not doing a workshop on the software. I just want to talk about how I'd go about collecting data so I can run this. So now I have my 3 probes here connected, and I would like to run a graph and just compare them, right? So currently it's giving me 3 different graphs. I can set this up again so I have all 3 graphs are the same and then we'll compare it directly. But I'm just going to leave it like this because I'm sure that you can understand the relationship with these numbers. So now that I have this set up, I'm going to hit start, and this is the same thing the students do. And the nice thing about this is that it's going to be relatively quick. So I'm going to hit start. I'm going to turn my light on, which I didn't test this morning, so hopefully in my car ride over here, I didn't bang it too much. Normally I have it set up slightly differently. I have a little clamp or something so I could hold the light over here, but I didn't bring that today. Okay, so it's not on the soil the way I want to. Like I said, I normally have a clamp that would hold it in place so that my light. But there's a lot of good questions that come from this, because the students would maybe put the bulb over here or put the bulb over here, and so the actual lab design itself, you can start walking around the classroom and then start questioning how they decide to set up all their equipment. But I can run this now, and it's going to be a little bumpy because I kept on moving the light around. But even now, the way the light's shining, I come over here and I make an observation. I can see that the focus of the light is actually right in the middle. So I might expect, if there's not the exact data I expect to get, I can actually take a look at where the light is shining. I also have the light really close. I'd have it much further away, so there wouldn't be as much of a heat effect. So I have this graph, and let's just let it run for a few more seconds. And as it's running, think about what you can do with your class, right? We're going away from the area of demonstrations to the area of students actually doing the lab. Because the students do this. You saw how long it took. I'm actually doing a workshop presentation, and I'm talking as I'm going through it. We know the students need a little bit more instruction, but we run the same lab in class. We run it more than once. And each time we're asking slightly different questions. The first time they do it, they get to choose anything they want. The second time they do it, they're a little bit smarter. They recognize, you know what, I can't really compare the gravel all that well to the dirt. I can't really compare my water, because a lot of times I'm going to use water. But how do you set up a lab like this to do water? It's a great inquiry piece. It's a great lab design piece to use a graduated cylinder. Does everything go in a graduated cylinder? Can I test something in a graduated cylinder versus something in a flat like this? Is that fair? Am I changing too many variables? All sorts of things to look at. But at the end of this, whether or not you run this for 30 seconds, which you can, or you run it for 5 minutes, you get data. And now I'm not worried about all that stuff that disappeared in the middle. And now they can start looking at the dry versus the wet, the specific heat capacity, the albedo. And now I'm actually missing something, because I'm talking about albedo. And what is albedo measuring? Albedo is not just measuring the heat. I mean, the heat's kind of a byproduct. We assume that if the albedo is high, the light's being reflected and it's going to be cool. If the albedo is low, the light's being absorbed and it's going to be hot. That's what we're assuming. So you're missing one key piece of information here. And that key piece of information that you're missing is, do you know? Can you tell me? We're missing light. I need to know how much light is being reflected off of this. So if I was in 1996 and I want to figure out if the light's being reflected, I'd take a piece of paper up here and I'd look at the paper and I'd see how bright it was. And I'd use a qualitative measure to determine that, yes, the white paper was bright underneath the white sand. And the white paper was a little dimmer underneath the dark sand. It was qualitative. But now, I can take this tool here and I can add another probe. Let me actually stop it here. And I'm just going to add this meter here. I'll turn it on, that helps. And now there's my light sensor. And normally I wouldn't hold it. I had the other retort stand, but I can clamp it down. But in the interest of time, I will hold it. I'm not going to update it. So now, I'm going to select my light. And I want lumens. So this light sensor measures a whole bunch of things, but I just want to know how bright it is. So I'm going to look for this thing here says lux. And so when I turn this on, and I run it, my other graph would still be going, and I could just place this over to find out how bright it is. So I could place this over each of the different substances to find out what the reflectivity is. And it gives me a number. This is not a graph. I don't care about the graph or the changing. I just need the number. So now I can take a lux of 1,000 versus a lux of 100. Is 1,000 actually cooler because it's brighter, it's reflecting more? Is a lux of 100 warmer because it's absorbing more? So that's great data. And that's what I really like about this world that we have. So that's an example of one lab and how I run it using this technology. So let me just stop all this stuff here, turn off the lights so we don't overheat anything, move it out of the way. And as I go through this, if you have any questions you would like to ask, feel free. All right, so in terms of taking this to the next step, so I've collected data. The students have collected data, so what? It's great data, it's great inquiries, they're great questions to be answered, but what is the next step? Well, the next step is, well, I'll tell you what we do. So we do a lot of connections to schools outside of our building. And we do a lot of connections to schools around the world, actually. And we connect with students who are on farms that are outside this country. We take some of our farmer soil. And Texas is a great example. We have a great partnership with a school in Del Valley. And their soil is so different. It's like a brown, reddish clay, depending on where you go. It's good for growing. And then there's ours, is this rich loamy material. And when we start looking at some of the weather comparisons and some of the data comparisons, we're able to share our data with them, and they will share their data with us, and then we're able to make a larger answer to a question around albedo, how it might affect the areas that they live in. So being able to take your data and connect it to other people, they don't have the same probes we do. They have a different set of probes, but they're still able to give us data. And we're able to share that very, very quickly with each other. And it's easy enough for us to, if we have a relationship, to talk to the teacher and they take 15 minutes to collect that data for us. And we can take 15 minutes to collect that data for them because the probes make it so easy. Here's another lab. This is a good lab because you can do it in all sorts of grades. It makes a lot of sense. It's a chemistry lab, it's a biology lab, it's a physics lab, it's a junior lab. So I use this lab in particular in grade 10. I also use a lab that's similar in grade 12, which Pratik showed you. And this is all about surface area and volume. So the classic surface area and volume that I did in 96 was actually agar, right? I take an agar cube, I make these little cubes, I make 1 by 1 by 1, 2 by 2 by 2, and cut them or whatever. I'd put it in a die, and we'd watch it, and then after like half an hour, we take it out, and you see that in the small cube that the dye went in very quickly, and in the large cube, the dye barely went in. And so we're looking at surface area to volume ratio. You're doing mitosis, you're doing cells in grade 10 science. You're talking about why does the cell need to divide? Because the surface area volume ratio ends up just going out of whack, and therefore the cell's very inefficient, so it's got to split. That's one of the reasons. So surface area and volume is a key concept, but a lot of teachers will gloss over it because A, the math, or kids in the math, sometimes you say something in the numbers and I don't know what happens. B, to spend so much time on the surface area and volume concept as an inquiry model seems to take a lot of time away from learning mitosis and cell cycle. But really, talking about the cell cycle and the chromosomes moving around isn't that engaging. You lose a lot of students. It's straight memory work in many cases. So anything you can do to bring in the inquiry, I would say is quite advantageous. So the agar route, it's okay. It's an amazing amount of prep though, right? To make the agar, to cut the cubes and then get the dye and hope that they don't ruin it and hope it works. Sometimes you don't let it set properly and it kind of ends up being this mushy mold. So instead, we use a living cell model. So you get these beets, great model, super easy. Beets are relatively cheap, no matter what time of year you go. And you cut the beets into, so I'm doing a full class, right? So it's another experiment that's going to take like 10 minutes. You got our little discs, we cut them into little squares. And this is supposed to be like 1 centimeter, so I would have had a ruler, I would have measured it. And then I cut the strips that are 1 centimeter strips. And then these strips here, I cut them into 1 centimeter cubes. So 1 by 1 by 1. So I have these 3 cubes. The first I'd leave as a cube. The second one I cut into 4. So I have 4 pieces. So it's still got the absolute, if I put them all together, the same dimensions, but now cut into 4 cubes, I have 4 smaller cubes which all have a different surface area to volume ratio. And the last one, I'd cut into either 8 or 16. I let the students decide. If they got dexterous fingers and they can do 16, great. If they can only do 8, that's fine as well, because with ProbeWare doing the data collection, you can tell the difference. So if I didn't have the probe, I can still do this experiment. So what I do is I take my 8 pieces, my 4 pieces and 1 piece, and I put them into their own little beakers full of water. 10 mils of water for my 16 pieces, 10 mils of water for my 4 pieces, and I ran out of glass, it broke actually, so I used a cup, but there's 10 mils of water in here as well. And so these things have been sitting here for a couple of hours soaking. In class, because we're using ProbeWare, we could let it soak for 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, you'll see a difference. And then, what I'm going to do is, if I look at it, what I should be able to observe, and you might not be able to from where you are, but you should be able to observe that the 16 piece versus the 1, anyway, are going to be different colorations, right? One's going to be more intense. But that's qualitative. And in science, we like numbers. And we want them to be able to graph things and look at relationships. So, as opposed to being qualitative, being able to actually analyze the data, we can use a special probe. I can use the same probe he did, the colorimeter, or I can use an older one. We have this older colorimeter, which is, for me, somewhere blue. There it is. I got a colorimeter. So in here, the same like he did, I do have to calibrate it. So I've got these cuvettes, these funky cuvettes, and I'm going to put some water in here. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to connect this. Again, it's super easy, because a lot of times you see things like this and you have to set up for half an hour or something like that, and it just looks silly how long it takes. So I'm just going to turn on my sensor. So this is another one of those ones. This is a wireless, so I can connect it directly, and it's much more versatile. This one is not. I normally plug it into a computer, but with this little contraption doodad, it's called an AirLink. But it allows me to connect to my phone if I wanted to, but I'm doing it on my computer so you guys can see. So I can connect, and on here I'll see colorimeter. AirLink, I mean, because I'm an AirLink. And then when it connects, it will, which one was it? 104, okay. So I'm going to select 104 here. Yeah. And I'm going to add a new screen. I just keep on adding new screens, but normally if you're doing it, you'd just be doing one experiment at a time. And for this, I only care about the number. I can make a table, I can make a graph, but I'm just going to look at a number for now. Right? So there's my number. I'm going to select the measurement, which is, I can't see it from where I am. I'm going to come down here to my colorimeter, and I'm going to go to, so this is chemistry. So in chemistry, you're going to be looking at the spectrum, and you're going to be looking at how light waves get absorbed. And so depending on the chemistry teacher, if they're looking at something that's red, they would know that they shouldn't be looking at red transmittance. They should be looking at the other side of the color wheel. So I might look at green or blue. Transmittance, it's in green, sure, why not? And I'm going to calibrate it. Make sure it works properly. And I know it's calibrated when my green light goes off here. And once it's calibrated, I'm going to take my solution from my 1. So you can't see it, so I'll pour it in here. My incredibly accurate, oh no, see that? I missed over my hands. I thought if I said the words, it would work out. So now I use Kim wipes to clean this. I'm going to hit play so I can see my numbers. I'm going to put my 1 in.
Did you have water inside before?
I did. I put water in here to calibrate it.
She put the original substance in.
Whatever substance.
Because they had ethanol.
That's right. He had ethanol, so that's why I used ethanol. And I'm using water, so I'm using water as my base. I've seen that it's 100%, so I might have tried to change. If I looked at a different one, I looked at, what was that, red? If I looked at blue, maybe? Still reading 100%. Well, I'm gonna let it run. I'm gonna take that one out. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my 4 here. Pour that in. Put that in. My percentage went down, my transmittance. Typically, the lower the number, you have to talk with the students, the less is being transmitted, that means the more is being absorbed. And if I do my 16, and again, you do have to choose the right color. So with the grade 10s, I just tell them what color to choose, because we're not going with the color wheel, that's not part of their learning. But if I was doing this with the grade 12s, they would have to choose. They'd have to figure it out. And if they chose the wrong color wheel, they'd see numbers that don't really make a lot of sense. Go back to my blue one more time. Oops. Go to my blue. Green. Oh. And go to start. And I do my last one here. Pour it in. Like I said before, just by looking at them, you can see, right, qualitatively, from where you are. This one's light and the one piece. This one, I don't know if you can see the difference. I can from where I am. It's not extreme, but there's a slight difference. This one's a little bit more intense. So qualitatively, I can see already that one of them's darker than the other one. But quantitatively, I'm just going to go back to these again. So that was 100. That's going to be 13 or something like that. And it's going to be 12.5. So the two of them are very similar according to this, the way it's been running. I didn't clean my glassware, and there's a few other things that might be, but that's what the colorimeter allows me to do. It allows me to very quickly look at the absorbance, and then I can make some questions and some answers about the surface area to volume ratio. So it's a really quick lab, relatively quick lab that students can do. And they're not spending all the time doing the data collection, they're doing this time on analysis, which I really like. I really like the idea of spending time on analysis as opposed to data collection. So that's how this has changed. And I'll put all these things up online, so if you want to ever look back at these, then you're more than welcome to. So in our 21st century teaching and learning classroom, the students are getting different data, right? So if I did this, I might have got 100%, 50%, and 70%. I might have done something wrong. Then what? Well, we want to encourage our students to collaborate, and getting them to walk around and share data and walk around and share data, that's time consuming, and they might not even talk about the right things, they might get distracted. So with all our data in our experiments, all our data shares, we always have Google Sheets open. and the students are responsible for entering their data in the Google Sheets. And at the end, we always do class averages. They're responsible for looking at their own data, and they're responsible for looking at the class data. And we ask them in grade 9 and 10 why we use averages, but by the time we get to grade 11 and 12, it's just habit. They know, we don't have to say anything. They open up their own Google Sheets, they share the stuff. It's brilliant, it works really nicely. But it takes a while to get there. It does take a while to get there. It doesn't just happen overnight. But once you build that culture of sharing and collaboration, it works really nicely. And I have colleagues who have left the school and do similar experiments in other places, and we share data back and forth all the time. Because Google Sheets, you just need a link, and off they go. So that's another way of taking this learning a little bit beyond the classroom. So something like Google Sheets. Okay. The Antacid Lab. Another classic lab. Do you have any questions? Because we have like 8 minutes. And I'm just going to go over a couple more labs. I do have a guest. All right, so let me connect with her. Because keep on talking about the expert, right? That expert that's going to look back at your data. So how do you get that expert? Where does that expert come from? So she's going to talk to that. Hopefully, she will connect with me. Stacy, are you there? Send my message. Stacy. And I will. Meeting. I will find her, Stacy. Hopefully it will work. Hi, Stacy. I'm just going to face you around so you can see our audience here. And I just finished telling them about a bunch of inquiry possibilities using some ProBury getting instant data. And I told them that if they get this instant data, there's a possibility. Can you hear me fine, Stacy?
I can hear you, it's just a little bit echoey.
Okay. I just finished telling them that if they get this data, that there are a lot of experts out there who would be willing to help them look at the data. And so the question now that has come up is, how do you find those experts?
Great. So I know we don't have much time, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen with you, which is something that any expert you contact will be able to do, and show you how you get started and how you look at the directory that we have available of experts who will connect via video, just like we're doing now. So on the Partners in Research Canada website, which is pirweb.org, and that'll take you here, you can learn more about our programs, including the VROM program, or Virtual Researcher on Call, which is what would be your primary mode of connecting with someone. And you can actually click right through to our expert book directory. And from here, sign in as teacher. This is exactly what you would see. So you can filter by grade level. I don't know if you're secondary or if anyone there is elementary. You can also filter by the language, and then enter any search term you'd like in this field. So we have some example search terms down here, but you can certainly put any